You click this video because you want to actually understand the tyrants. Not just know their names, but understand what they were, where they came from, and why Umbrella spent decades and countless lives trying to perfect them. The Tyrant program is the backbone of Resident Evil's entire bioweapon story. Every monster Umbrella ever created was either a stepping stone toward the Tyrant, a cheap alternative to it, or a direct evolution of it. Everything connects back here. Tonight, I'm going to break down the complete story of that program and the first generation of models. What they were designed to do, what it actually took to build them, and what made each one different from the last. This is part 1. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe, so I know you want to see part 2. Now let's get into it. Umbrella realized that standard zombies were inefficient for tactical deployment in a modern war zone. The T-virus typically reduced human hosts to mindless consumers of flesh, with no strategic awareness. In 1988, the organization shifted its primary focus toward the Tyrant Project. They wanted a soldier that could follow complex orders and operate military equipment in the field. This required a host that could maintain high-level intelligence while undergoing a massive viral mutation. The goal was to create an intelligent commander for the biological battlefield. Standard zombies were effective at spreading infection, but they could not secure a facility or retrieve a specific sample. The researchers wanted an organism that could infiltrate enemy lines and eliminate specific targets with surgical precision. They needed a biological asset that functioned as a weapon rather than a natural disaster. The Tyrant was designed to be the ultimate realization of this corporate military vision. This shift in research philosophy led to the creation of the Arklay laboratory and the secret facilities in Europe. The organization invested billions of dollars into the study of human genetics and viral compatibility. They realized that the T-virus needed a stable host to produce a functional officer. This host would act as the anchor for the infection, directing the lesser creatures toward a unified goal. The project was an attempt to turn the prehistoric fire into a programmable machine of war. The Tyrant Project represented the peak of the pharmaceutical ambition. It moved beyond the accidental outbreaks and the random mutations seen in the early years of the 1980 decade. The scientists were now acting as biological architects, carving a new species out of the human genome. They wanted a god that would wear a corporate uniform and follow a tactical contract. This was the start of the era of the super soldier in the world of Resident Evil 1. The project faced a massive genetic obstacle that nearly killed the research before it began. Data from the early experiments showed that the T-virus typically caused total brain decay in the host. To become a tyrant, a human being needed a very rare set of genetic markers to maintain their intelligence. The researchers estimated that only 1 in 10 million humans possessed the specific DNA required for a successful transformation. This rarity made the production of a reliable commander a statistical nightmare. Most test subjects simply mutated into zombies or suffered a total cellular collapse during the injection phase. The virus was too aggressive for the average human nervous system to handle without losing its higher functions. This compatibility problem forced the company to search the globe for the 1 in 10 million individuals. They needed a perfect biological match to act as the template for the future of the Tyrant program. This scarcity turned the project into a hunt for a genetic miracle. This lack of compatible hosts led to the creation of the Project W and the monitoring of the Sergei Vladimir clones. The organization realized that they could not rely on random recruitment to find their super soldiers. They had to manufacture or steal the genetics they required to move the project forward. The human cost of this search was absolute, with thousands of incompatible subjects being discarded as biological waste. The rarity of the host was the only thing protecting the world from a massive army of gods. The genetic barrier also influenced the internal politics of the different corporate branches. The American and European labs fought over the few successful specimens they managed to produce. Every functional tyrant was a high-value asset that represented a decade of scientific labor. The compatibility problem was the primary reason the company eventually turned to cloning and parasitic integration. They had to bypass the natural limits of the human species to fulfill the Spencer dream. Umbrella developed two official design categories for their biological assets. The Infiltration type was designed to look human enough to enter urban zones without causing an immediate panic. These models possessed a humanoid shape and could be dressed in tactical gear to blend into a civilian crowd. The goal was to have a super soldier that could move through a city like a grey man. Mr. X is the most famous example of this subtle design philosophy. The combat type was a loud weapon built for the open battlefield or the defense of a secure facility. These specimens did not care about their appearance or their humanity. They featured giant claws, exposed hearts, and massive muscle growth that made their biological nature obvious. The combat type was used to clear a zone of all life through raw physical power. The T-002 specimen from the Resident Evil 1 mansion is the definitive example of this aggressive category. These two types allowed the organization to market their B.O.W. assets to different clients. A government might want an infiltration type for a secret assassination, while a military might want a combat type for a frontline assault. The researchers tailored the viral load and the physical training to suit the specific mission parameters. This categorization turned the biological horror into a structured product line. Each tyrant was a tool built for a specific kind of violence. The distinction between the types also determined the level of intelligence and control required for the host. Infiltration models needed a higher degree of tactical awareness and a more stable personality. Combat models could be more feral, as their only job was to destroy the enemy in a direct engagement. This duality defined the evolution of the project for the next 20 years. The organization was building a new world where the monsters were designed for every possible scenario. Every tyrant produced by the company is equipped with a high tensile power limiter. This device often takes the form of a heavy green trench coat or a suit of reinforced black armor. The limiter is not intended to protect the creature from enemy fire or environmental hazards. It is a biological straitjacket designed to keep the T-virus from triggering a secondary and uncontrolled mutation. This ensures that the tyrant remains in its humanoid form and follows its tactical programming. The limiter functions by applying a constant pressure to the muscular and nervous systems of the host. It prevents the rapid cellular growth that occurs when the virus is allowed to run wild. By keeping the biological fire under a mechanical shackle, the researchers maintain the intelligence and the stability of the super soldier. Without the coat or the armor, the tyrant would quickly lose its tactical focus and become a danger to its own handlers. The limiter is the only thing that makes the weapon professional. If the power limiter is destroyed during a combat engagement, the results are catastrophic. The sudden release of the viral load causes the host to undergo an immediate and violent transformation. The skin hardens, the claws grow, and the physical strength increases by a massive percentage. However, the mental link to the corporate commanders is usually severed. The tyrant becomes a self-sustaining engine of destruction that no longer cares about the mission objective. The broken shackle is the start of a total containment failure. The organization viewed the limiter as an essential component of their industrial success. They could not sell a weapon that might turn on its own owner in the middle of a battle. Every trench coat was a sign of corporate authority over the prehistoric fire. The destruction of a limiter was considered a tactical failure of the First Order. It turned a refined soldier back into a primitive monster. The coat was the difference between a product and a disaster. The super tyrant is the final form of a specimen that has lost its power limiter. This state is characterized by a massive increase in physical size and the growth of lethal biological weapons. The host usually sprouts a second claw and develops a thick, rocky hide that can resist standard small arms fire. The speed and the aggression of the creature are doubled, making it the most dangerous organism on the battlefield. It is the raw power of the T-virus without any human restraint. While a super tyrant is more powerful in a direct fight, it is significantly less useful for a corporate mission. The transformation typically destroys the higher brain functions of the host, reducing it to a mindless berserker. It can no longer recognize allies, use tactical equipment, or follow a complex extraction plan. The specimen will simply kill every living thing in its vicinity until it is destroyed. A super tyrant is a failure of control in a project that was built on the idea of a commander. This transformation is a one-way street for the biological asset. Once the limiter is gone and the secondary mutation begins, the tyrant cannot return to its humanoid state. It is a biological overload that eventually leads to a cellular collapse if the creature is not killed in battle. The organization saw the super tyrant as a last resort or a tragic accident. It was the weapon breaking in the hand of the user. The power was absolute, but the utility was zero. The appearance of a super tyrant in a civilian zone like Raccoon City was a sign of a total disaster. It proved that the company could not contain the fire they had started in the lab. Every recorded instance of this form has ended with the total destruction of the host and the environment. The super tyrant was the proof that the Spencer dream of a master race was fundamentally unstable. You could have the strength of a god, but you had to trade your mind to get it. Section 2, the T-002, the first real tyrant, Part 6, the proto-tyrant, T-001, the failed first attempt, why it was scrapped, and what its data built next. The T-001 was the first attempt at creating a functional super soldier in the Arklay laboratory. This proto-tyrant was considered a total physical and mental failure by the research team. Its skin was constantly peeling, leaving the muscular and nervous systems exposed to the air. It lacked the genetic stability to maintain its humanoid form, resulting in a grotesque and deformed appearance. The specimen was a reminder of how difficult it was to tame the prehistoric fire. The nervous system of the tyrant was its primary weakness. The host suffered from a constant state of neurological pain, which made it highly aggressive and impossible to control. It could not follow even the most basic tactical orders. The researchers realized that they had created a monster rather than a soldier. The project was nearly scrapped after this failure, and the specimen was dumped into the dark basement of the mansion facility. It was a ghost of a project that had failed. However, the data gathered from the T-001 was essential for the next stage of the project. The scientists learned why the host was rejecting the virus and how to stabilize the internal organs. They realized that they needed to protect the heart and the brain from the rapid cellular growth. The failure of the proto-tyrant provided the biological blueprint for the success of the next model. Every scar on the T-001 was a lesson for the future of the company. The specimen was eventually encountered by the STARS members during the 1998 incident. It was a mindless beast that wandered the lower levels of the lab, a tragic victim of the corporate ambition. Its defeat proved that even the early errors of the organization were lethal to a normal human. The T-001 was the first step on a long and bloody road. It was the failed foundation of a viral empire. The T-002 was the first specimen to achieve the status of a successful and stable bioweapon. It was a massive improvement over the earlier proto-tyrant model, featuring a thick grey skin and a refined muscular structure. This specimen was the biological benchmark that proved the Tyrant Project was viable. It possessed the strength to flip a tank and the speed to catch a trained soldier. It was the god that the researchers had been trying to build for a decade. The most iconic feature of the Tyrant was its massive external heart. The researchers included this design to handle the extreme blood flow required for its superhuman physical performance. While the heart was a visible weakness, it was a necessary sacrifice for the raw power of the creature. This specimen could sustain a level of combat intensity that would have killed a normal human in minutes. It was a clinical realization of the Marcus dream, a weapon with a pulse. The specimen also showed a rudimentary ability to recognize a target and engage in tactical combat. It used its massive claw to impale enemies and could withstand multiple hits from high-caliber weapons. The Tyrant was the first model to be considered merchandise by the board of directors. They finally had a product that they could sell to the global military market. It was the start of the industrial era for the pharmaceutical giant. This specimen was the centerpiece of the Arklay laboratory in 1998. It was kept in a cryogenic tank, waiting for the final test that would prove its worth. The researchers viewed the T-002 as their greatest achievement, a being that stood at the peak of the evolutionary ladder. It was the first real tyrant, and its existence would change the course of human history. It was the weapon that started the global arms race. In 1998, Albert Wesker used the STARS unit as a disposable test for his greatest biological asset. He lured the elite team into the underground laboratory specifically to see how the T-002 performed against human combatants. Wesker wanted to collect the live combat data before defecting from the organization. He saw the incident as a final experiment that would increase the value of his research on the black market. The mansion was his private testing ground. Wesker monitored the engagement from the control room, recording every movement and every kill. He wanted to see if the Tyrant could handle a tactical unit that was trained to fight under pressure. The STARS members were the best soldiers in the city, making them the perfect benchmarks for the super soldier. Wesker did not care about the lives of his fellow officers. To him, They were just data points in a corporate spreadsheet. The mission was a total betrayal for the sake of science. The combat test proved that the T-002 was a lethal success. It moved through the lab with a terrifying speed, forcing the survivors to use every resource to stay alive. The data showed that the specimen could react to gunfire and use its environment to its advantage. Wesker was satisfied with the results, believing that he had the most valuable information in the history of the company. The mansion incident was the successful birth of the Tyrant legend. However, Wesker's arrogance led to his own tactical failure. He believed that he could control the god he had helped to build. He underestimated the biological independence of the specimen once it was released from the tank. The decision to use a live test against the stars was a calculated risk that eventually destroyed the laboratory and the organization's secrecy. The mansion incident was a victory for the researchers, but a disaster for the brand. As a final act of biological independence, the Tyrant impaled Albert Wesker immediately after its awakening. This moment defined the legacy of the specimen and proved a fundamental truth about the project. Without a secondary mental shackle, even a successful tyrant was a threat to its own creators. The creature did not recognize Wesker as its master. It saw him as the first target in its path. The assassination was a clinical display of the monster's lack of loyalty. This event showed that the organization had focused too much on physical power and not enough on mental control. Wesker was left for dead on the floor of his own laboratory, a victim of the very weapon he had tried to sell. The incident proved that a tyrant was a feral predator that required a leash to be a professional soldier. This lesson would lead to the development of the power limiter and the parasitic integration in later years. The death of the creator was the first failure of the god. The assassination also forced the survivors to engage the creature without any corporate interference. It became a pure battle for survival between the elite humans and the biological superweapon. The T-002 showed no remorse or hesitation, attacking with a focused aggression that was terrifying to behold. It was a man-made monster that had rejected its own origin. The legacy of the specimen was one of total and violent autonomy. Wesker eventually survived the encounter through his own viral injection, but the lesson remained. The T-002 had set the standard for the danger of a loose tyrant. It was a weapon that could not be trusted in a room with its owner. Every future model would be designed with a way to ensure that the death of the creator never happened again. The impalement of Wesker was the moment the organization realized they were playing with a fire that wanted to burn them. The final battle on the heliport of the Arklay estate provided a definitive set of data for the organization. After the power limiter of the T-002 was effectively bypassed, the creature entered its super tyrant state. It demonstrated a lethal level of speed and physical aggression that forced the surviving STARS members to rely on heavy weaponry. The defeat of this T-002 by a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher was a significant tactical event. It highlighted the biological vulnerability of even the most advanced super soldier when faced with modern explosives. This defeat became a clinical lesson for the researchers in the 1998 era. The external heart of the T-002 was a primary point of failure that the heroes exploited during the encounter. To create a successful product, the company needed to internalize the vital organs and provide a more durable hide. The mansion incident proved that biology alone was not enough to win a war against trained infantry. The T-002 mattered for everything that followed, because it established the baseline for the entire project. It proved that a human host could maintain a lethal form while hosting the T-virus. Every future model, from the mass-produced T-103 to the cybernetic TALOS, was a direct response to the data gathered on that heliport. The researchers spent the next several years trying to replicate the power of the T-002 while fixing its obvious defensive flaws. It was the original blueprint for industrial death. The termination of the T-002 also led to the closure of the laboratory and the shift toward urban testing. The organization realized that they could no longer hide their research in a remote forest. They needed to see how their weapons performed in a crowded environment with more complex variables. This T-002 was the first and final test of the isolation era. It left behind a legacy of blood and a technical manual for the next generation of biological superweapons. The breakthrough for the mass production of the project came from a former Soviet colonel named Sergei Vladimir. He was the rare 1 in 10 million match that the organization had been hunting for decades. His genetics were perfectly compatible with the T-virus, allowing him to maintain total intelligence and a stable form during the mutation. Spencer realized that Sergei was the genetic key to building an army. In exchange for executive power, the colonel provided the company with 10 clones of himself to jumpstart the industrial era. These clones served as the identical hosts for the T-103 model. By using a single genetic template, the researchers removed the statistical variable of host compatibility. They could now produce a stock of identical super soldiers in a laboratory environment without searching for rare humans. This shifted the project from a series of expensive accidents into a streamlined manufacturing process. Sergei Vladimir was the father of the modern Tyrant army, providing the body for the corporate will. The cloning process occurred in the secret facilities in Russia and on Sheena Island. The researchers harvested the genetic material to create a limitless supply of hosts that would not reject the viral load. This allowed for the testing of different tactical equipment and power limiters on a massive scale. The T-103 was the first model to benefit from this industrial stability. It was a weapon that could be ordered by the dozen, each one identical to the last in both strength and loyalty. Sergei's connection to the project ensured his own high-level status within the corporate hierarchy. He oversaw the deployment of his own clones into various combat zones to gather more data. He viewed the T-103 as a personal extension of his own military power. The colonel and his clones were the primary reason the company managed to survive the legal pressures of the late 90s. They had turned a genetic miracle into a standard military product for the global market. Part 12, from T-002 to T-103. The transition from the T-002 to the T-103 was a process of total refinement. The researchers used the failure of the T-002 to guide the design of the new T-103. The most significant change was the internalization of the external heart. By placing the vital organs behind a thick ribcage and a reinforced hide, the company removed the primary weakness of the earlier model. The T-103 was a more durable and reliable asset for a sustained engagement. Intelligence was the second major focus of the refinement process. The T-103 possessed a vastly improved stalker intelligence that allowed it to follow complex orders over a long period. It could recognize specific targets and navigate urban environments with a high degree of tactical awareness. Unlike the feral T-002, this model could operate as a silent hunter. It was designed to be a professional operative rather than a mindless beast in a laboratory basement. The company finally had a tyrant that it could replicate with absolute consistency. Every T-103 that came off the assembly line possessed the same physical traits and mental stability. This allowed the organization to develop standardized training manuals and deployment protocols. They were no longer building individuals. They were building a product line. The T-103 was the definitive version of the super soldier that Spencer had envisioned in the '60s decade. This model also featured a more sophisticated relationship with its power limiter. The researchers developed a way to keep the creature in its humanoid form, even under extreme physical stress. This stability made the T-103 the preferred choice for urban recovery and sensitive extraction missions. It was the weapon that proved the company could master the prehistoric fire. The jump from the T-002 to the Russian mass production was the most important leap in the history of the project. Part 13. The T-103 design. The physical design of the T-103 was focused on the concept of urban recovery. It stood at over 7 feet tall and possessed a massive muscular frame that was hidden beneath a green tactical coat. This coat was a chemical-resistant power limiter that served two primary purposes. First, it kept the viral mutation in check during the mission. Second, it provided a humanoid appearance that allowed the creature to walk through a city without causing an immediate public panic. It looked like a very large, bald human in a military uniform. The internal anatomy was a masterpiece of biological engineering. The T-103 possessed a secondary nervous system that allowed for rapid healing and a high tolerance for pain. Its bone structure was reinforced with calcium deposits to resist the impact of small arms fire. The T-103 did not have the exposed organs or the peeling skin of the earlier models. It was a clean and professional product that reflected the industrial might of the pharmaceutical giant. It was the first true infiltration-type super soldier. Tactically, the model was equipped with a variety of sensors that allowed it to track its targets through sound and scent. It could operate in total darkness or in environments filled with smoke and debris. The researchers gave the T-103 the ability to open doors, use elevators, and recognize the difference between a civilian and a target. This level of autonomy was unprecedented for a biological asset. It was a soldier that did not require a human handler to be effective in the field. The T-103 also had a more stable super-tyrant transformation. If the limiter was destroyed, the creature would sprout a single, massive claw and develop a rocky hide. This transformation was more controlled than the total cellular breakdown seen in the T-002. It allowed the creature to remain a lethal threat even after its tactical disguise was compromised. The T-103 was the ultimate realization of the corporate vision for a controllable and marketable superweapon. Part 14. Ivan, the white coat variant built as Sergei's personal bodyguard. Ivan refers to a pair of customized T-103 models that served as the personal bodyguards for Sergei Vladimir. These specimens were distinguished by their white power limiters and their high-tech headgear. The headgear was designed to improve the synchronization between the two specimens and their human commander. They were the most tactical and intelligent versions of the T-103 ever built. Sergei used them to protect his own life and the most valuable assets of the company during the final years. The white coats were a more advanced version of the standard green limiter. They provided a higher level of protection against environmental hazards and included a built-in communication array. The Ivan twins could work together to flank an enemy or provide suppressive fire for their master. They were not just hunters. They were professional bodyguards who understood the concept of a defensive perimeter. This level of teamwork was a significant breakthrough in the study of tyrant behavior and group dynamics. A unique feature of the Ivan design was the total suppression of the super-tyrant transformation. Because their primary job was protection and tactical support, the researchers did not want them to become mindless berserkers. The headgear and the white coats were designed to prevent the secondary mutation, even if the physical body was heavily damaged. This made them more tactical, but arguably less powerful in a direct physical confrontation. They were the peak of the infiltration type philosophy, prioritizing control over raw aggression. The Ivan specimens were eventually destroyed by Albert Wesker during his raid on the Russian facility in 2003. Their defeat proved that even the most intelligent and synchronized tyrants could not match the power of a superhuman operative. However, their data provided the foundation for the future of the cybernetic integration projects. They were the bridge between the biological soldier and the mechanical drone. The twins were the final and most refined products of the Sergei Vladimir cloning program. Part 15, Mr. X, deployed to Raccoon City. During the Raccoon City outbreak in 1998, the organization dropped 6 T-103 models into the quarantine zone via a high-altitude transport. One specific specimen, known as Mr. X, was assigned a high-priority mission at the police station. His mission parameters were twofold: retrieve a G virus sample hidden within the pendant of Sherry Birkin, and execute any surviving witnesses who could testify against the company. He was a surgical tool sent into a chaotic environment to secure the corporate future. The deployment of Mr. X was a clinical act of evidence suppression. The board of directors realized that the STARS survivors and the police were gathering data that could destroy the brand. By sending a T-103 to the police station, they ensured that no human could escape with the truth. The specimen moved through the building with a cold and mechanical focus, ignoring the zombies and the fires to hunt his specific targets. He was the physical personification of the corporate cleanup effort in the Midwest. The search for the G virus was the most important part of the mission. The organization was desperate to recover the work of William Birkin before the city was sterilized. Mr. X was programmed to recognize the biological signature of the virus and to track the location of the pendant. He was a biological bloodhound in a tactical coat. The mission proved that the T-103 could operate independently in a total containment failure. It was the ultimate field test for the Russian clones. The presence of Mr. X in the station created a tactical nightmare for the survivors, like Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield. He was an unstoppable force that could not be killed by standard police weaponry. Every time he appeared, the mission shifted from investigation to raw survival. The deployment was a success in terms of tactical performance, even if the specimen eventually failed to secure the sample. It proved that the company had a weapon that could dominate an entire city from the shadows. Part 16. The Pursuit. The deployment of the T-103 in the Resident Evil 2 remake introduced a fundamental shift in the tactical landscape of the series. This specimen, known as Mr. X, was programmed with an unyielding persistence that moved beyond the scripted encounters of the earlier games. He functioned as a non-scripted stalker who would actively track the target across the entire police station using audio and olfactory sensors. This changed the experience from a series of isolated fights into a constant state of biological dread. The player was no longer the hunter in the facility. They were the prey for a superior organism. The stalker mechanic utilized the advanced artificial intelligence of the T-103 design. Mr. X could hear the sound of footsteps, the firing of a weapon, or the movement of a heavy object through the walls. He would navigate the corridors of the police station with a mechanical logic, cutting off escape routes and trapping the survivors in dead ends. This level of persistence proved that the T-103 was a masterpiece of search and destroy engineering. He did not wait in a specific room for the fight to begin. He hunted for the fight until he found it. This unyielding pursuit highlighted the physical resilience of the Green Limiter design. While a standard zombie or a hunter could be stopped with a well-placed shot, Mr. X would simply pause to adjust his tactical coat before continuing his advance. He was a wall of muscle and chemical-resistant fabric that could not be moved by small arms fire. This forced the survivors to conserve their ammunition and focus on evasion rather than confrontation. The pursuit was a psychological weapon that broke the spirit of the human defenders before the physical attack even started. The olfactory tracking allowed the specimen to maintain a lock on the target, even when the visual line of sight was broken. He could sense the biological presence of the survivors through the ventilation shafts and the doors. This made the police station feel like a closed cage, where every room was a potential trap. The T-103 was the first biological asset to truly master the art of the long hunt. He was a professional who understood that his target would eventually tire, while his own viral engine required no rest. The presence of the stalker also changed the way the environment was explored. Survivors had to listen for the heavy thud of his boots on the floor above them, planning their movements around the position of the Reaper. The station became a tactical puzzle, where the primary objective was to stay one step ahead of the grey man in the coat. This persistent threat elevated the T-103 from a simple monster to a legendary figure in the history of the outbreak. He was the machine that never stopped until the mission was complete. Ultimately, the pursuit showed the superiority of the Tyrant Project over the random mutations of the T-virus. A zombie is a local obstacle, but a T-103 is a global mission threat. The ability to track a target across miles of urban terrain was the primary selling point for the corporate clients. The organization had built a predator that could not be outrun or outsmarted by a normal human. Mr. X was the definitive proof that the era of the mindless consumer was over. He was the stalker who owned the city. Part 17, Super Mr. X. The transformation into Super Mr. X occurred after the specimen suffered a catastrophic environmental event in the secret laboratory. During the final hours of the Raccoon City incident, the specimen fell into a vat of molten metal during a confrontation with the survivors. This intense heat completely burned away the green power limiter, releasing the full force of the T-virus into the host's system. The resulting mutation was significantly more aggressive and lethal than anything seen in the earlier T-002. It was the raw power of the Sergei Vladimir clones unleashed. In this form, the specimen sprouted two massive flaming claws and developed a thick, volcanic hide that could withstand extreme temperatures. The physical speed of the creature increased to a superhuman level, allowing it to move across a room in a single leap. The Super Mr. X was a biological engine of destruction that had lost all of its tactical restraint. It was no longer interested in the G virus sample or the witness execution. It was only interested in the total annihilation of the threat. The shackle was gone, and the fire was out of control. The final fight against this form took place on an elevator platform as the Nest facility began its self-destruct sequence. The survivors were forced to engage the monster in a tight space where evasion was nearly impossible. The Super Mr. X demonstrated a physical aggression that surpassed the standard mass production models. Every strike of its claws could tear through steel and flesh with ease. It was the ultimate test of human survival against a perfected biological weapon. The specimen was the final barrier between the heroes and their escape. The destruction of the limiter proved that the T-103 was a much more dangerous asset than the organization had initially realized. The base mutation was stable and powerful, creating a super tyrant that was nearly invincible to conventional weapons. Only a high-grade rocket launcher provided by an outside source was enough to terminate the specimen. This confirmed the lesson of the mansion incident. Even a perfected god could be killed by a concentrated explosive strike. The fire could be put out, but only with a massive effort. The transformation also served as a warning to the researchers about the volatility of their mass production models. While the green coat provided excellent control, a simple environmental failure was enough to turn a professional soldier into a global disaster. The Super Mr. X was a reminder that the corporation was always playing a dangerous game with the prehistoric fire. They had manufactured an army of gods, but those gods were always one accident away from becoming demons. The final fight was a visceral display of the company's own hubris. After the specimen was terminated, the data from its final moments was recovered by the organization's agents. They saw that the Super Mr. X was the peak of the biological super soldier era. It had achieved a level of physical performance that justified the billions of dollars spent on the project. However, the lack of control in the final state remained the primary obstacle for the board of directors. They needed a weapon that could be powerful without becoming a berserker. This would eventually lead to the development of the Nemesis parasite. Section 4. The Nemesis T-Type. Part 18. The European Alternative. While the American branch of the organization was focused on the mass production of clones, the European division in France was pursuing a different philosophy. They believed that relying on raw genetics was a primitive solution to the intelligence problem. The European researchers developed the NE-alpha parasite, a biological computer designed to be implanted into the brain of a host. This parasite would take over the higher brain functions of the tyrant, providing a level of perfect control that a virus alone could not achieve. It was the Nemesis Project. The NE-alpha parasite was an organism that functioned as a biological leash and a secondary brain. It was grown in a specialized laboratory in Europe and tested on various biological assets before being integrated into the Tyrant program. The parasite would wrap itself around the nervous system of the host, allowing the researchers to program specific mission objectives and tactical maneuvers directly into the creature. This was a clinical solution to the mental instability that often ruined the super tyrant state. The Europeans had built a driver for the monster. This alternative approach created a significant internal competition between the regional branches. The French laboratory wanted to prove that their intelligence-based solution was superior to the American reliance on rare genetics. They saw the Nemesis as a more refined and marketable product for the high-end military clients. It was a weapon that could not only kill, but also think and adapt to the battlefield. The rivalry between the branches drove the project toward its most dangerous and successful iteration. The parasite provided the specimen with the ability to use complex weaponry and make strategic decisions in real time. It could recognize a target from a distance, plan an ambush, and even communicate in a primitive fashion. This was a level of cognitive performance that the standard T-103 could never reach. The NA-alpha was the digital heart of the biological super soldier. It turned the Tyrant into a programmable drone that possessed the physical power of a god. The European branch had found the secret to the perfect weapon. By integrating the parasite with a T-103 host, the researchers created the Nemesis T-type. This was the ultimate search and destroy unit, a creature that combined the physical durability of the Russian clones with the mental focus of a computer. It was designed specifically to hunt and eliminate the most dangerous human targets in the world. The project represented the peak of the corporate ambition, a fusion of two different biological horrors into a single, unified machine of war. The Reaper had been given a mind. The development of the Nemesis also highlighted the shifting focus of the organization toward total control. They realized that a weapon was only valuable if it could be perfectly directed toward a goal. The NE-alpha parasite was the final answer to the question of the Arklay failure. It ensured that the creator would always be the master of the creation. The European alternative was the future of the company, a future where the biology was a machine and the mission was absolute. The hunt for the STARS members was about to begin. Part 19, the American versus European program. The internal competition that produced the Nemesis. The internal politics of the corporation were defined by a Cold War between the American and European research branches. The American division focused on the physical perfection of the T-103 through cloning. They believed that a massive soldier was the only way to dominate a conventional battlefield. This led to the creation of the Mr. X models, seen in the Resident Evil 2 remake. The Americans prioritized the mass production of their biological assets to secure a global market share. Umbrella Europe viewed the American approach as primitive and intellectually lazy. The French researchers believed that raw physical power was useless without total mental control. They wanted a weapon that could think, adapt, and execute complex tactical maneuvers without a human handler. This led to the development of the NE-alpha parasite, which was a biological computer that could be integrated into a host body. The European branch wanted to prove that their intelligence-based methodology was the superior path for the corporate future. The competition between the two branches resulted in a forced collaboration for the Nemesis project. The American labs provided the stable T-103 bodies, while the European scientists provided the parasitic brain. This merger of technology created a biological superweapon that was faster and smarter than anything built in the Arklay lab. The organization was essentially testing two different philosophies against each other in a single organism. The result was the most dangerous hunter in the history of the 1998 outbreak. This rivalry ensured that the Nemesis T-type received the highest level of funding and technical oversight. Every regional director wanted to claim the success of the project for their own division. The European branch used the Nemesis to showcase their technical superiority over the American researchers. They saw the parasite as the final solution to the control problems that had ruined the earlier models. The project was a masterpiece of corporate ego and scientific ambition. The Nemesis was the first model to fully integrate these two divergent research paths. It possessed the muscular durability of the Russian clones and the cognitive flexibility of the European parasite. This synergy allowed the creature to operate in environments that would have confused a standard Mr. X model. The organization had successfully built a weapon that could navigate the urban chaos of a citywide infection. The internal competition had produced a biological god that followed a corporate contract. Ultimately, the American and European branches remained rivals until the final collapse in 2003. They continued to trade data and assets, but their different philosophies defined the evolution of the biological war. The T-103 remained the backbone of the military sales, while the Nemesis was the elite tool for surgical strikes. The organization was a house divided, but its products were the most lethal weapons on the planet. The competition had reached its peak in the streets of the Midwest. Part 20, what the NE alpha parasite did, how implanting it into a T-103 created something smarter and more dangerous. The NE alpha parasite was a unique organism that functioned as a secondary nervous system for the host. When implanted into the brain of a T-103, the parasite would consume the existing brain functions and replace them with its own predatory intelligence. This allowed the Nemesis T-type to maintain a level of cognitive awareness that no other biological weapon could achieve. The parasite acted as a sentient computer that could be programmed with specific mission objectives and tactical data. The integration of the parasite fixed the primary flaw of the T-virus mutation. In most specimens, the virus caused a total decay of the intellect, turning the host into a mindless beast. The NE-alpha acted as a biological leash, preventing the cellular breakdown and keeping the host in a stable state. This allowed the Nemesis to perform tasks that required a high level of dexterity, such as operating a rocket launcher or a flamethrower. It was the first Tyrant that could use the tools of a human soldier. Tactically, the parasite gave the creature a photographic memory and an advanced tracking capability. The Nemesis could recognize the faces of the STARS members from a distance and prioritize its targets based on their threat level. It could plan ambushes, dodge incoming projectiles, and even speak in a primitive fashion to intimidate its prey. The parasite provided a level of strategic depth that turned the hunt into a game of biological chess. It was the ultimate evolution of the search and destroy concept. The parasite also managed the physical healing of the host at a molecular level. If the T-103 body suffered major trauma, the NE-alpha would trigger a rapid mutation to adapt to the threat. This led to the multiple stages of the Nemesis transformation, where the parasite would grow larger to compensate for the damage to the flesh. The organism was a survival engine that refused to let the weapon die. It was a parasitic intelligence that viewed the host as a disposable chassis for its own mission. This biological computer allowed the organization to monitor the mission in real time, as the researchers could track the heart rate and the neural activity of the Nemesis from their secret bunkers. They could see how the parasite reacted to the stress of combat against elite agents. The NE-alpha was a data-gathering tool that provided the company with the most valuable biological information in their history. It was the brain of the monster and the soul of the project. By using the parasite, the European branch had bypassed the natural limits of the human genome. They did not need a 1 in 10 million host to create an intelligent soldier. They only needed a stable body that could host the NE-alpha. This discovery made the production of high-level superweapons much more efficient and reliable. The Nemesis T-type was the proof that the future of the organization was in the fusion of different species. It was a machine made of meat and code. Part 21. The Raccoon City deployment. The mission to hunt down and kill every surviving STARS member. In September of 1998, the organization deployed the Nemesis T-type into the quarantine zone with a very specific mission. While the Mr. X models were focused on the retrieval of the G virus, the Nemesis was sent to liquidate the surviving members of the STARS unit. The board of directors wanted to ensure that no one could testify against the company in an international court. The creature was the physical realization of a corporate cleanup operation. It was the Reaper sent to harvest the witnesses. The deployment was a clinical test of the creature's tracking abilities in an urban environment. The Nemesis was programmed with the biological signatures and the visual data of every officer involved in the mansion incident. It moved through the city with an unyielding focus, ignoring the civilian population and the zombies to find its specific prey. The creature was a biological heat-seeking missile that would not stop until the target was confirmed as dead. It was the most focused hunt in the history of the series. The Nemesis utilized a variety of high-level tactics during the deployment. It cut off the escape routes of the survivors and destroyed the communication equipment of the local police. The creature demonstrated a level of cruelty that suggested a primitive understanding of psychological warfare. By shouting the name of its target, it broke the mental resilience of the officers before the physical engagement began. The Nemesis was a weapon that targeted the mind just as much as the body. The presence of the creature changed the nature of the survival for Jill Valentine. She was no longer fighting for her life against a random outbreak. She was being hunted by a professional assassin. Every encounter with the Nemesis was a violent struggle against a superior intelligence. The creature's ability to use a rocket launcher and run at high speeds made it a threat that could not be outpaced. It was the definitive stalker enemy of the Resident Evil 3 Nemesis era. The deployment also served as a live fire exercise for the European researchers. They monitored the creature as it engaged the elite human agents, recording how the NE alpha parasite adapted to the combat. The mission provided the data needed to refine the next generation of parasitic weapons. The organization viewed the destruction of the city as a massive laboratory where they could test their best product against their best enemies. The Nemesis was the star of the show. Ultimately, the Raccoon City mission proved that the organization had successfully built a weapon that could execute a complex legal strategy. By killing the witnesses, the Nemesis was protecting the brand from total collapse. It was a soldier that followed the orders of the legal department as much as the research division. The Nemesis T-type was the final word on the company's ruthlessness. It was the hunter that would never sleep until the truth was buried under the rubble. Part 22. 3 forms. The Nemesis's mutation stages and what each one meant biologically. The Nemesis underwent 3 distinct mutation stages during the Raccoon City incident, each representing a shift in the biological priority of the parasite. Stage 1 was the humanoid form, dressed in a black tactical limiter. In this form, the creature prioritized intelligence and weapon usage. It was the perfect tracker, capable of running, jumping, and operating heavy machinery. The parasite remained hidden within the brain, focusing on the tactical execution of the mission. This was the most balanced and efficient version of the weapon. Stage 2 was triggered when the humanoid body suffered critical damage, causing the NE alpha parasite to take a more active role in the host's survival. The creature shed its limiter and grew into a massive, quadrupedal beast with long tentacles and a thick hide. In this form, The Nemesis sacrificed its tactical intelligence for raw physical power and agility. The parasite moved to the surface of the skin, acting as a secondary nervous system to coordinate the rapid movements of the massive body. It was a predator that relied on speed and reach. The biological shift in Stage 2 proved that the parasite was an adaptable organism that could rewrite the host's DNA in real time. The creature could now scale buildings and lunge at targets with incredible force. However, the ability to use complex weapons was lost as the hands mutated into claws. The Nemesis was now a biological animal, driven by the parasite's instinct to eliminate the target at any cost. This stage was a desperate reaction to the resilience of Jill Valentine and the local military. Stage 3 was the final and most grotesque form of the Nemesis. After suffering massive trauma and chemical exposure, the host body suffered a total cellular collapse. The Ne-alpha parasite expanded to consume the remaining flesh, turning into a colossal, wall-sized mass of tentacles and acid sacs. This form was the result of the parasite trying to keep the biological engine running without a functional skeleton. It was a stationary but lethal barrier that blocked the escape of the survivors. Intelligence was gone, replaced by a massive biological wall. Biologically, Stage 3 was a failure of the Tyrant chassis, but a victory for the parasitic life form. The Nemesis had become a self-sustaining environment of viral mutation. It could produce its own acidic fluids and thrash its tentacles with enough force to crush a tank. This stage proved that the Ne-alpha parasite was an immortal entity that would continue to fight even after the host was destroyed. It was a nightmare of organic growth that reflected the absolute danger of the European research. The 3 forms of the Nemesis provided the organization with a complete map of the parasitic evolution. They saw that the weapon could adapt to any threat, moving from a surgical assassin to a massive blockade. This versatility made the Nemesis T type the most valuable data point in the history of the B.O.W. program. Each stage was a lesson in how to combine 2 different species into a unified engine of war. The creature had died 3 times, but it had successfully hunted its prey to the edge of the world. Part 23, Nemesis versus Jill Valentine. The confirmed most dangerous tyrant ever deployed in a real operation. The battle between the Nemesis and Jill Valentine is confirmed as the most dangerous deployment in the history of the corporation. This is because the Nemesis was the only tyrant that could infect its targets with a secondary strain of the virus during the hunt. While other models relied on physical force, the Nemesis used its tentacles to inject the pathogen directly into the bloodstream of its prey. This turned the engagement into a race against a biological clock. Jill was fighting both a monster and a molecular invasion. The infection added a layer of tactical complexity that made the Nemesis superior to the T-002 or Mr. X. It could weaken its target from a distance, slowing their movements and compromising their mental focus. This made the eventual physical attack much more likely to succeed. The creature was a carrier of the plague and a dealer of death. This secondary infection capability was a key part of the European design, ensuring that even a missed strike could result in a mission success. The pursuit of Jill Valentine lasted for several days, moving across the entire city and into the underground laboratories. The Nemesis survived multiple explosions, high-caliber gunfire, and environmental hazards that would have killed any other B.O.W. Its persistence was a display of the Ne-alpha parasite's total commitment to the contract. The creature did not show fatigue or hesitation, always reappearing when the survivor felt safe. It was the personification of the corporate will to erase its own mistakes. The final confrontation at the disposal facility required a massive experimental railgun to terminate the specimen. This highlighted the extreme durability of the Nemesis compared to the earlier models. A rocket launcher was no longer enough to ensure a total kill. The organization realized that they had created a being that surpassed the limits of conventional warfare. The battle proved that the Nemesis T-type was the most expensive and the most successful weapon in their catalog. Jill Valentine's survival was a miracle of human resilience and tactical skill. She had faced the best product the company could build and emerged as the winner. This failure was a significant blow to the European branch, and proving that even a biological computer could be outsmarted by a trained human. The data from the fight was recovered by the company's agents, providing the foundation for the next generation of intelligent weapons. The Nemesis was dead, but its shadow hung over the future of the series. Ultimately, the Nemesis versus Jill Valentine engagement is the benchmark for every other Tyrant fight. It set the standard for what a biological super soldier could achieve in a total containment failure. The creature was the ultimate hunter, and Jill was the ultimate survivor. Their struggle was the final act of the Raccoon City tragedy, a battle between a machine made of meat and a woman who refused to die. The Reaper had met its match in the streets of the Midwest. The specific specimen evacuated from Arklay and why it was chosen. The origin of the TALOS project began with the evacuation of a specific specimen from the Arklay laboratory in 1998. This was the T-011, a model that possessed a unique level of physical stability and neurological resilience. While the mansion was burning, Sergei Vladimir personally oversaw the retrieval of this asset to ensure it did not fall into the hands of the authorities. The organization decided to stop relying on biology alone for control and began to move toward a cybernetic solution. The T-011 was chosen because its genetics allowed for a seamless integration with mechanical hardware. The researchers realized that the intelligence problem could be solved by replacing the host's nervous system with a computer chip. By bypassing the biological brain entirely, they could pilot the Tyrant like a drone from a remote location. This was the start of the Tyrant Armored Lethal Organic System. The organization was building a tank with a pulse, using the Arklay specimen as the chassis. The evacuation of the asset was a high-priority mission that showed the value the company placed on the T-011 data. They moved the specimen to the secret refinery in Russia, where the cybernetic integration began. The researchers stripped away the humanity of the host and replaced it with a network of wires and processors. They were no longer building a living creature. They were building an industrial machine. The Arklay specimen was the ghost that would inhabit the metal shell of the TALOS. The project represented a shift away from the parasitic research of the European branch. The Russian scientists believed that machines were more reliable than parasites, which could still mutate and go wild. They wanted a weapon that was locked into a digital command structure. The T-011 provided the physical engine, and the UMF-013 supercomputer provided the brain. It was a union of the prehistoric fire and the modern processor. The result was the most overbuilt weapon in history. By using the T-011, the organization was recycling its past successes to build its future. They knew that the Arklay genetics were stable and powerful, making them the perfect foundation for the armor. The TALOS was a monument to the corporate history. a weapon that carried the legacy of the 1998 incident into the next decade. It was the final evolution of the Tyrant concept, a being that was more machine than meat. The project was the last insurance policy for the Spencer Empire. Part 25. Tyrant Armored Lethal Organic System. Umbrella's most ambitious and most overbuilt B.O.W. The TALOS was the most ambitious and the most overbuilt biological weapon ever created by the organization. It was a massive humanoid engine of destruction, encased in heavy tank plating and armed with military-grade hardware. The project was designed to be the ultimate asset for the global military market, a weapon that could replace traditional armored divisions. The TALOS was a clinical display of the company's industrial power, a machine that turned the biological horror into a marketable tank. The armor of the TALOS was made of a chemical-resistant alloy that could withstand high-caliber rounds and explosive strikes. It protected the vital organs and the viral core from any external threat, making the creature nearly invincible in a direct engagement. The organization wanted a weapon that could walk through a firestorm and continue its mission. The TALOS was not a hunter or a stalker. It was a frontline juggernaut designed to crush the enemy through absolute force. It was the hammer of the Spencer vision. Tactically, the system was linked to a satellite network and a remote supercomputer. This allowed the commanders to pilot the TALOS from across the globe with total precision. The creature could react to battlefield data in real time, and moving with a mechanical logic that bypassed the hesitation of a biological brain. It was a drone made of flesh and steel, a weapon that could not be bargained with or intimidated. The organization had finally achieved the total control they had been hunting for 30 years. The TALOS was also equipped with a missile pod and an automatic weapon system on its shoulder. This allowed the creature to engage targets at range, fixing the primary weakness of the earlier models. It was a versatile platform that could fight infantry, armor, and even aircraft. The project proved that the corporation had moved beyond the era of the zombie and into the era of the industrial war machine. The TALOS was the ultimate realization of the bioweapon dream. However, the complexity of the system made it incredibly expensive and difficult to maintain. It required a massive support structure of supercomputers and engineers to stay operational. The TALOS was an overbuilt solution to a problem that the company had already solved with the Nemesis. It was a monument to the ego of the Russian branch and the desperation of the final years. The organization was building a god at the same time their financial empire was collapsing into bankruptcy. Ultimately, the TALOS was the final word on the Tyrant Project. It was the peak of the evolutionary and mechanical ladder, a being that stood at the center of the biological war. It was the last weapon that the organization would ever produce, a machine that reflected the total corruption of the human form. The TALOS was the Reaper in a suit of armor, a final threat to a world that was already moving on from the pharmaceutical giant. It was the end of the line. Part 26. Cybernetic Integration. How TALOS combined a tyrant body with military hardware. The cybernetic integration of the TALOS was the most advanced biological procedure ever conducted in the Russian labs. The researchers replaced the host's natural spinal cord with a high-speed data link connecting the muscular system directly to the internal computer. This allowed for a near-instantaneous response time during combat engagements. The TALOS did not move like a living creature. It moved with the jerky and precise motions of a robot. The biology was now just a fuel for the mechanical directives. The integration also included a direct link to the Red Queen's supercomputer. This AI could monitor the biological health of the specimen, and adjust the viral output in real time to compensate for damage. The Red Queen served as the digital brain of the TALOS, processing tactical data and identifying targets with a 99% accuracy rate. The creature was a biological extension of the computer's logic, a pawn on a digital chessboard. This was the ultimate fusion of life and code. Military hardware was fused directly into the skeleton of the Tyrant. The missile pod was anchored into the shoulder bone, and the armor was bolted to the skin with titanium pins. This integration ensured that the hardware would not be knocked loose during a violent struggle. The TALOS was a walking weapon platform that carried its own ammunition and fuel. It was a self-sustaining engine of war that could operate for days without a resupply. The company had turned the human form into a chassis for a tank. The cybernetic systems also managed the heart rate and the hormone levels of the host. By keeping the biological systems in a state of constant chemical balance, the researchers prevented the super-tyrant transformation from occurring. The TALOS would remain in its armored form, even after suffering critical damage. The machines were in total control of the prehistoric fire. This solved the intelligence problem and the stability problem in a single mechanical stroke. It was a clinical victory for the Russian scientists. This level of integration required a total erasure of the host's identity. There was no trace of a human mind left inside the metal shell. The TALOS was a hollow being, a biological puppet moved by a satellite signal. This was the logical conclusion of the Spencer philosophy. A world where humans were just raw material for a more efficient machine. The cybernetic integration was the final act of the corporate violation of the human species. The weapon was perfect because it was empty. The data from the TALOS project would later be stolen by Wesker and used to build his own global network. He saw the value in the cybernetic approach and used it to refine his own tactical assets. The integration of life and machine was the future of the biological war, moving away from the messy mutations of the past. The TALOS was a prototype for a new world of programmable soldiers. It was the bridge to a future where the Reaper was a machine. Part 27. Sergei Vladimir and the Russia Stronghold. Where TALOS was being kept, and why the TALOS was the crown jewel of the Caucasus stronghold, hidden deep within a repurposed Soviet refinery in Russia. Sergei Vladimir kept the weapon there as his final insurance policy to protect the organization's most valuable research data. The refinery was a fortress guarded by a private army and a massive array of biological assets. Sergei believed that as long as the TALOS existed, the red and white logo would never truly die. It was the final barrier between the truth and the world. The Russia Stronghold was the last functional facility in the company's global network in 2003. While the American and European branches were collapsing into bankruptcy, Sergei used the refinery to maintain the flame of the progenitor virus. The TALOS was being prepared for a final tactical demonstration that would convince the world's governments of the company's continued relevance. It was a weapon of political leverage as much as a weapon of war. Sergei was the last loyal soldier who refused to surrender. The facility was linked to the UMF-013 supercomputer, which stored the entire history of the company's research. The TALOS was programmed to defend the data center at any cost, serving as the ultimate guardian for the corporate soul. Sergei saw himself as the czar of this new biological empire, and the armored tyrant was his champion. The refinery was a tomb for the original vision, a place where the old world of the founders still lived in the dark. The location of the stronghold was a secret known only to the highest level of the executive board. because it was chosen for its isolation and its connection to the former Soviet military infrastructure. The TALOS was being tested in the frozen tundra, proving its ability to operate in extreme cold. Sergei wanted to show that his weapon was superior to the American models that had failed in the Raccoon City summer. The refinery was the site of the company's last stand against the coming judgment. Inside the facility, the TALOS was kept in a massive containment chamber, connected to the diagnostic machines and the satellite links. It was a being that was constantly being refined and updated by the Russian scientists. Sergei viewed the creature as his masterpiece, a being that combined his own military discipline with the company's biological genius. The stronghold was a monument to the arrogance of the final years, a place where a dying giant was still trying to build a god. The eventual raid by Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine would bring the history of the refinery to a violent end. They discovered the TALOS and the dark secrets of the Sergei Vladimir clones. The destruction of the stronghold was the definitive blow that ended the organization's physical existence on the planet. The armor of the TALOS could not protect the company from the truth. The refinery was the final grave for the red and white umbrella. The last lab was gone. Part 28. How Wesker destroyed it. The final boss of Umbrella Chronicles and what its defeat represented. In 2003, Albert Wesker infiltrated the Caucasus stronghold during the final raid by the international authorities. While the heroes were fighting the first stage of the TALOS, Wesker reached the inner sanctum to seize the downloaded research data. He encountered the armored tyrant in its final, ceiling-mounted spider form. This was the final boss of the Umbrella Chronicles era, a being that had mutated beyond its mechanical shell to become a massive biological mass of tentacles and lasers. Wesker engaged the TALOS with a clinical speed and a superhuman power. He saw the creature as a relic of a failed era, an overbuilt toy that was too slow to match his own evolution. The battle was a display of the new order replacing the old. Wesker dismantled the armored giant piece by piece, proving that a single, perfected god was superior to an industrial machine. The defeat of the TALOS was the final act of his betrayal. He had destroyed the last weapon of the company he once served. The destruction of the creature represented the definitive end of the organization's era of supremacy. The company had spent 30 years and billions of dollars to build the ultimate soldier, and it had been erased by a single man in a matter of minutes. The TALOS was the peak of the corporate vision, and its failure proved that the vision was fundamentally flawed. You could not build a god in a factory. The era of the giant was over, replaced by the era of the ghost. Wesker used the destruction of the TALOS to trigger the self-destruct sequence of the facility. He escaped with the UMF-013 data, leaving the refinery to burn in the Russian snow. He had successfully taken the soul of the company and killed the body. The defeat of the final tyrant was the signal to the world that the original umbrella was gone. The board of directors was arrested and the logo was removed from the market. The Reaper was now the only master of the prehistoric fire. The battle also highlighted the shift in the nature of the biological threat. The TALOS was a stationary and predictable enemy, while Wesker was a mobile and intelligent one. The future of the war would be fought by individuals like the Wesker children, not by massive tanks in military uniforms. The defeat of the armored giant was the closing chapter of the industrial biography of the corporation. The world was now facing a threat that was faster and smarter than any mechanical system. Ultimately, the destruction of the TALOS was the symbolic death of the Tyrant Project. The organization had reached the top of the ladder and found nothing but a failure. The creature was the most advanced weapon in history, and it could not save its masters from the consequences of their own research. The TALOS was the final monument to the Spencer ambition, a machine that died in the dark of a Russian refinery. The architect was dead, and his last soldier had been scrap metal. Section 6, Thanatos, Part 29. The Rogue Project, how Greg Mueller built Thanatos. Outside of Umbrella's official channels, Thanatos was a rogue project developed by a disgruntled scientist named Greg Mueller during the final hours of the Raccoon City incident. Mueller was a brilliant researcher who hated the organization's focus on the mass production of the T-103 clones. He believed that the company had lost the art of creating a single, invincible god. He wanted to go back to the original philosophy of the Tyrant Project, building a being that was unique and supreme. He built Thanatos in the secret labs beneath the Raccoon City University. Mueller operated outside of the official corporate channels, using his own private resources and stolen viral samples to build his masterpiece. He viewed himself as a true artist in a world of industrial bureaucrats. He did not care about the tactical contracts or the military sales of the board of directors. He only cared about the beauty and the lethality of his creation. Thanatos was a middle finger to the company that Mueller felt had betrayed the scientific soul of the project. It was a weapon built on spite and ego. The rogue nature of the project made Thanatos an unpredictable variable during the outbreak. The organization's cleanup teams were not aware of the creature's existence until it began to slaughter their own soldiers. Mueller unleashed his god to prove that his individual genius was superior to the company's collective power. He watched from his office as Thanatos moved through the university, a biological predator that followed no orders but its own. It was a pure realization of the viral fire, unburdened by corporate limiters. Greg Mueller had a deep contempt for the stars and the B.S.A.A., but an even deeper hatred for his own employer. He saw the T-103 as a watered-down version of the prehistoric dream. By building Thanatos, he wanted to show the board of directors what a real super soldier looked like. The creature was a biological statement of independence, a being that reflected the mad scientist's own isolation. It was the only tyrant that was built for the sake of art rather than profit. The project was eventually discovered by the U.B.S. operatives, sent to retrieve the viral research from the university. They found themselves in a battle for their lives against a creature that they had no data on. Thanatos was a ghost that haunted the halls of the school, a final trap left behind by a man who wanted to burn everything down. Mueller died with his creation, believing that he had successfully built the perfect god. He was the ultimate example of the internal decay that destroyed the corporation. Thanatos represented the danger of a decentralized biological war. Even a single scientist with a lab could build a world-ending threat if they had the right genetics and the will to use them. The Rogue Project proved that the prehistoric fire could not be contained by any corporate structure. The virus was a force that invited individual madness and biological arrogance. Greg Mueller was the first of many freelance researchers who would haunt the world in the post-Umbrella era. He was the architect of a private apocalypse. Part 30, the T-002, callback. Why Thanatos looked like an older model, and what that said about Mueller's methods. Physically, Thanatos was a direct callback to the original T-002 design seen in the Arklay mansion. It featured the iconic exposed heart and a single, massive claw on its left arm. Greg Mueller believed that the early designs were the most pure and lethal versions of the virus. He rejected the internal organs and the green coats of the T-103 as unnecessary complications that weakened the weapon. He wanted a return to the raw, visceral power of the Arklay prototype. The return to the T-002 aesthetics was a conscious choice to honor the work of James Marcus. Muller saw the original virologist as the true father of the project, and viewed the later mass production as a betrayal of his legacy. Thanatos was a biological monument to the 1980s, a creature that looked like the nightmare that started it all. It was a man-made monster that wore its heart on its sleeve, a display of total biological confidence. Muller wanted the world to see the prehistoric fire in its most honest form. This design choice also highlighted Muller's focus on raw lethality over tactical control. While the external heart was a weakness, it allowed for a massive increase in blood flow and physical output. Thanatos was faster and stronger than the standard Mr. X models, capable of jumping across entire city blocks in a single leap. It was a creature that did not need a limiter, because it was built to be a god, not a soldier. Muller was not interested in a product that could walk through a city. He was interested in a being that could level one. The physical similarity to the Arklay specimen created a sense of existential dread for the survivors. It was as if the original horror had come back to finish the job. Thanatos moved with the same predatory grace as the T-002, but with a refined speed that reflected Muller's own scientific improvements. It was the original dream of the founders, and built with the technology of the 1990s. The callback was a reminder that the corporation had been chasing the same ghost for 30 years. Muller's methods were a combination of old-world science and modern spite. He used the university labs to conduct experiments that the company would have considered too risky or too expensive. He did not care about the survival of the host. He only cared about the output of the mutation. Thanatos was the result of a man who had stopped looking at the human cost and started looking at the biological beauty. It was a return to the roots of the project, a final act of devotion to a dead virologist. Ultimately, the design of Thanatos proved that the T-002 remained the most frightening vision in the franchise. The exposed heart and the massive claw are the universal symbols of the biological superweapon. By returning to this form, Muller had successfully tapped into the core fear of the human species. He had built a Reaper that looked like the original Reaper. Thanatos was the ghost of the Arklay mansion, reborn in the fire of Raccoon City. It was the art of death, perfected by a madman. Part 31, Raccoon City University. The deployment context and the daylight reagent connection. Thanatos was unleashed during the final hours of the Raccoon City incident within the halls of the university. The deployment context was a chaotic struggle between the rogue scientist, the U.B.S. cleanup teams, and the local survivors. Greg Muller used the creature to protect his private laboratory and to eliminate the corporate operatives sent to seize his research. The university became a vertical battlefield where the survivors had to navigate the floors while being hunted by a god with an exposed heart. It was a localized apocalypse within the larger disaster. The connection to the daylight reagent was the primary reason the heroes were in the university. This experimental chemical was a potential cure or vaccine for the T-virus, developed by a different group of researchers in the same building. Muller viewed the daylight as a threat to the purity of his biological vision. He wanted the world to be consumed by the fire, not saved by a chemical reagent. He used Thanatos to destroy anyone who attempted to manufacture the vaccine, turning the search for a cure into a fight for survival. The creature's speed and agility were on full display in the university environment. It could move through the library and the lecture halls with a terrifying efficiency, using its reach to impale enemies from across a room. Thanatos was programmed to protect the lab, but its aggression was so high that it would attack anything that moved. The B.O.W.s soldiers, despite their elite training, were reduced to prey for the rogue specimen. It was a display of individual genius overwhelming the corporate military structure. The school had become a slaughterhouse. The final battle against Thanatos took place in the central courtyard as the city was being prepared for sterilization. The survivors had to use the daylight reagent as a biological weapon against the creature, proving that the cure was the only thing that could stop the god. The battle was a race against time and the coming nuclear strike. Thanatos mutated into a superform that was even faster and more lethal, but the human spirit and the chemical solution eventually terminated the specimen. The rogue project ended in the rubble of the university. Muller's choice of the university as his lab was a tactical move to use the academic resources and the civilian cover. He had hidden a world-ending threat in a place of learning, reflecting his own twisted view of science. The daylight connection highlighted the two paths for the human race, a path of viral evolution or a path of scientific restoration. Muller chose the evolution, and he died for it. Thanatos was the final exam for the survivors of Raccoon City, to a test of their will to live in a world of monsters. The deployment of Thanatos remains a significant event because it showed that the organization's own employees were its greatest threat. The company was being destroyed from within by men like Muller, who had outgrown the corporate leash. The university incident was a microcosm of the global collapse that was to come. The prehistoric fire was out of control, and not even the giant could put it out. Thanatos was the Reaper who arrived for the company's final graduation. Part 32. What Thanatos represents. The danger of individual scientists building tyrants without corporate oversight. Thanatos represents the ultimate danger of the decentralized biological war, the individual madman with the power of a god. Sergei Muller proved that a single disgruntled employee could build a weapon that rivaled the best products of a global corporation. This represented a total breakdown of the containment and the oversight that the organization had maintained for 30 years. The prehistoric fire was now a commodity that could be stolen, refined, and unleashed by anyone with a laboratory and a grudge. It was the democratization of the apocalypse. The project showed that the tyrant dream was an infectious ideology that could survive the death of the company. Muller was not interested in the brand or the profit. He was interested in the art of the mutation. This kind of religious devotion to the virus made the individual researcher much more dangerous than a corporate bureaucrat. You could bribe a company, but you could not bargain with a man who wanted to watch the world burn. Thanatos was a weapon of pure nihilism, a being that had no purpose but to destroy. This rogue element would become the primary threat in the post-Umbrella era. The world would see a wave of freelance virologists and private syndicates who used the Spencer research to build their own private gods. The organization had built the tools and the blueprints, but they could not control the people who used them. Thanatos was the first sign of a future where the bio-terrorist was a man in a lab coat, working alone in the shadows. He was the most dangerous creature in the Resident Evil franchise. Muller's project also highlighted the failure of the corporate culture to maintain the loyalty of its best minds. By encouraging ruthlessness and ego, the organization had created a generation of monsters who eventually turned on their own masters. Thanatos was the physical manifestation of that internal rot. It was a weapon built on betrayal and arrogance, a being that looked like the past but represented a more chaotic future. The mad scientist was the true father of the 1998 outbreak. Ultimately, Thanatos is a reminder that the technology of the 1990s had outpaced the morality of the people who owned it. The ability to manufacture a super soldier was a power that no individual should possess. The creature was a warning to the world that the era of the pharmaceutical giant was over, but the era of the biological wildcard had just begun. The Reaper was no longer a corporate secret. He was a freelance operative with an exposed heart. The end of the world was now a private project. As the series moves forward, the legacy of men like Greg Mueller continues to haunt the global security network. The BSAA must fight against 1,000 small enemies who all possess a stolen vial and a dream of godhood. Thanatos was the prototype for this new era of decentralized horror. It was the weapon that proved that the architect is always more dangerous than the building.